mission projects that we construct, operate, and maintain. Certainly, some of the criteria that we're seeing, come forth on the new construction. One, without question, there has to be a federal interest. There's a public benefit, a national benefit to the project. So we're seeing that previously authorized projects we think are prime candidates for the opportunity to utilize these P3 tools. Of course, that includes a local cost share sponsor with those types of projects. And there's a value for money analysis that has to be conducted as we evaluate the tool to really compare the traditional delivery model to the different types of models that we would be utilizing with the P3, and really that's to prove out that there is the cost of the private financing, which typically we're seeing is over 20 to 50 years, depending on the type of project, is actually offset by the benefits that we see or would see of getting the projects in the ground earlier and the savings that would be associated there with faster delivery. Some of the areas that we're finding that as we still go through this process to evaluate questions, a number of questions that are still out there for us, certainly how do we account, one of the questions is how do we account for the federal investment share of the project in the budgeting process? Does it get counted up front, or is it accounted for over the entire length of the agreement, that 20 to 30 to 50 years, depending on what that particular agreement is? So there's a question that we still feel is out there. The other questions that we're really starting to see and some challenges or opportunities are how do we assure that the federal payback over the period of the agreement. So, if we're putting one of these packages together, what's the source and the authority for us to guarantee the private investor that over a period of, say, 30 years, that federal payback source is there, and where is it coming from? Certainly, what we've seen is we've worked with states on toll roads, for example. That payback typically comes from a toll, but is it fees that would be charged? Of course, for us, the Corps of Engineers, we would need authorities to, charge fees to retain to be able to pay back the investor. Or are there other indirect benefits that would be there depending upon the beneficiaries of the project? If it's inland navigation and the payback, who are all the beneficiaries? Is it the farmers, the towns, the industries that would be around the inland system? So those are some questions that we're still trying to evaluate to determine, are there other beneficiaries that could bring to the table the payback, so and how we would do that. Certainly we're looking at the different types of models, delivery models, from a design, build, operate, maintain that's done entirely private. Or different models might be a design build from the private perspective, operate, maintain through the traditional federal government. So these are just some of the areas that we're continuing to evaluate, as well as the type of governance that would be set up to be able to manage one of these P3 type contracts, and the governance really pertaining to the sponsor that would be working with the federal government, with the Corps, and paying back. Is it a state agency? Is it a port authority or other types of authorities? So one of the things that we're learning very quickly is that this, for the private investors, certainly is a business deal. I mean, for them, they're bringing capital to the table, up front to get the projects completed sooner, get them into operation. And rightfully so, they would expect that there's going to be a guarantee that they get that payback over that period of time. I equate it to like a home loan that you would have. That when you're going to get your home loan underwritten, they're going to want to know that you can have the ability to pay that back. So So really, one of the other things that we're really looking into and reaching out to private investors is to get a better understanding of what they expect when they're going to enter into one of these types of agreements. So again, as I said, we're kind of in the early stages of thinking. We've begun to really kind of do the evaluation analysis of different ways and means and opportunities, but we haven't really found all the answers yet, as this is really new for the Corps of Engineers, as the way that we would enter into an arrangement, a partnership to execute this type of work. So again, thank you for the opportunity to be here and provide some opening comments on at least what we're doing and looking at right now.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Crowley.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members. Thank you for your interest in our ports in this great country and the importance that they play in our economy and conducting commerce. I represent the waterfront employers and stevedores, those that are responsible for transferring the freight between waterborne and land or between waterborne conveyances. And their mission is to do that effectively and efficiently every day to ensure that we maximize the benefit of our commerce and within our communities and our nation. This subject is important. I think we do have something to contribute to the discussion. The port operator, who I represent, and for the most part they are private sector operators, look at the matter of private partnership as something that they've engaged in now for some time. What began as really a landlord-tenant relationship or a vendor relationship with stevedores early on is involved in many places to more of a public-private partnership in the fashion that we're talking about, driven by the need for investment from outside government sources in what is increasingly becoming expensive, not only the land, the container yards, but also the equipment. Our members today invest between tens of millions to $1 billion in order to accomplish their mission and receive the return on the investment over some period of time. It is a business deal, as Mr. Hannon has indicated. It's a commercial deal, best looked at in those terms. It's probably a little different than some other fashions of P3. Happy to discuss that and answer any questions that you, the members of the panel, have today.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member Capone. I appreciate your invitation to be here today. The Waterways Council supported the P3 provisions of WRDA. Senator Durbin, Senator Kirk came to us along with Representative Bustos and Representative Davis and asked us to get involved with this, and we agreed to do that, although we had some concerns with it. But my recommendation was based on the concerns that followed the P3 program and the Federal Aid Highway program. This committee was asked to support P3 program back in the 80s, and there was a lot of opposition to that from the contractors because there was fear that the allocation of work would only go to the major contractors, and the small family-owned businesses would not be able to compete for that work. The second issue was over tolling. The committee had a long time history of opposing tolling on any part of the federal aid highway system. And so in the 1987 Act, the committee authorized 7 demonstration projects to test the theory of whether P3s were feasible, and they were wildly successful. And what was found was that the subcontracts that were let for these projects went to the family-owned businesses, so it created new work. The public accepted these projects because it was new capacity, so where they opposed tolling on existing system, they were more than willing to support tolling if they've got new capacity. And they still had the choice of using the old system or the new capacity. And so it was with that experience that I approached the idea that maybe P3s would be relevant to the inland waterway system. We have been operating under a system that was created in 1824, where the federal government is the primary funder of inland waterway improvements, and the agency that carries it out is the United States Army Corps of Engineers. In 1978, this committee decided that in exchange for authorizing the Loxon Dam 26 project, now called Mel Price Loxon Dam, there would be a 10-cent per gallon levy placed on the commercial operators of the system to begin to pay for that. In 1986, the committee expanded that to 20 cents per gallon in exchange for authorizing some other navigation projects. And that worked out pretty well until Olmsted came along, the largest project ever authorized by this committee, $775 million. The Corps decided to change the method of construction to an in the wet instead of a cofferdam approach, and the promise was that that would save $15 million. And so that looked good, since the commercial users had to pay half the cost of that project. Unfortunately, that technology has not worked out. The cost of the project has gone to $3.1 billion. And the industry, working through the Inland Waterway User Board and the Corps, came to the Congress with a proposal called the Capital Development Plan, which you authored, Chairman Duncan, and along with 32 of your colleagues. And that led to a provision in WRDA which federalized 85% of the cost of Olmsted, making money available for the other projects. The committee has authorized 26 inland waterway improvement projects, $8 billion of work, which under the current pre-WRDA timetable would not be delivered until the 2060s to the 2090s, even though the most recent authorization was 2007. As a result of WRDA, we have already seen the appropriators make available $82 million for the other projects last fiscal year, and in the energy and water bill that's on the floor today, $112 million will flow to those projects. So the legislation which you authored has had a tremendous impact on beginning to work on the backlog of projects. But we approach the P3 opportunity as maybe another way to get towards those other Loxon Dam improvements that are going to wait for 20 or 30 years under the current program to get going. And the industry actually did a study, which I provided to the committee staff, looking at the Illinois waterway and what it would take to do a public-private partnership there. And our finding was that to just rehab the project would cost about 25 cents per ton, and to do a complete 1,200-foot lock expansion on 2 of the projects would take 60 cents a ton. Well, what does that mean? That means that each lockage of a standard industry tow today, 15 barges, would be $15,750. That is a tremendous burden to place on 300 carriers and their customers on the system. So it was our view that under a 50-year financing, that didn't work. But nonetheless, because of the experience of the highway program, we are very interested in exploring how to make it work, because otherwise we're going to wait for a long time. Our agricultural industry is looking to grow exports with the Panama Canal, reducing transportation costs. We have tremendous opportunity in the agricultural area and in the coal area to grow our exports. But we have to be ready with our modern, efficient, reliable inland waterway transportation system. So I thank the committee for its leadership on P3s in WRDA, for its leadership on addressing the problems of getting more funding to the projects, and I look forward to working with the committee.
Well, thank you very much. You certainly have a long association with this committee and great knowledge about the work that we've done through the years. Mr. Kronsteiner.
Thank you, Chairman and Ranking Member Capiano and members of the committee. My name is David Kronsteiner. I am the president of the Port of Coos Bay Commission, a position that's appointed by the governor of Oregon. The Port of Coos Bay is a public entity and has significant experience working with private sector for economic development. Although our projects have not followed a P3 model, we have extensive success in working with private partners to have success. It's important to note that the Port of Coos Bay is not an operating entity, in that the marine terminals in the Coos Bay Harbor are owned privately and are operated and work directly with the private sector transportation providers. First, I'd like to explain why the economic development is so important to the south coast of Oregon. Coos Bay at one time was the world's largest lumber exporting port, and with the decline of the timber industry, we've been for over the last 30 years in a recession, and it's important that we work our way back out of that. Two things happened that spurred the Port of Coos Bay to take action. One of them was the Weyerhaeuser paper mill during this recession shut their paper mill down, taking away many jobs from the community. And the second happened when a hedge fund who owned our rail line 103 miles from Coos Bay to Eugene decided to abandon it and applied to the Surface Transportation Board to do that. So the first action the port took was to arrange for the purchase of the Weyerhaeuser property, which consisted of 1,300 acres of industrial waterfront property. It happened through a partnership with a private entity. The port negotiated the sale, and Jordan Cove Energy bore the financial burden of $25 million to purchase the property. The port will end up with somewhere in around 800 acres of prime waterfront property through that deal. In another action, in April of 2009, the port acquired the Coos Bay Rail Line, our region to the North American line access. We sought that purchase through a feeder application to the Surface Transportation Board. And while the port partnered with the state and federal agencies for funding needed to restore the freight service, we continued to work with the shippers, and we asked them to participate then in the rehabilitation of the rail line. And they agreed to an additional tariff, one that's in addition to their tariff to move their cargo, to help support the port for those issues. After acquiring the rail line, the port's next focus was to identify an experienced professional railroad operator. The port chose ARG Transportation Services Incorporated, which operates the Coos Bay Rail Link under a management agreement with the port. ARG supplies the equipment, including the engine that operates and maintains the line. The port receives 10 to 20% of the revenues as a result of that, depending on the car movements. This public-private partnership has been a success from the beginning. Coos Bay Rail Link was named Short Line Railroad of the Year, and for good reason. In 2012, their first full year of operating, they moved 2,500 rail cars. The next year, in 2013, they doubled that. And this year, they're expected to move over 7,000 paying rail cars. And it's been a great partnership that has benefited the South Coast. The action to purchase the Weyerhaeuser property led to another partnership. Jordan Cove Energy has been working with the port for over 10 years and are in the final stages of acquiring a FERC permit to export LNG from the Port of Coos Bay. As I mentioned, they were instrumental in acquiring the property. The port has worked beside them to obtain permits and advance their business plan, and stands to join with them and own a portion of the facility and receive throughput when natural gas is exported. And even before the completion of the project in 2019, the South Coast area will receive great benefit from that, because they will begin paying immediately upon start of construction into the community. In order to grow the port needs a wider and deeper channel, and the port partnered with the state of Oregon several years ago. The feasibility process started, and then forged a partnership with Jordan Cove Energy to have the company fund channel improvements. Port staff initiated a feasibility study environmental impact statement under Section 203 of the Water Resources Development Act, and the state of Oregon, through legislative action, the support of the governor, is providing funds to support portions of that work. These funds have helped with the EIS, but will not cover all the costs. And Jordan Cove Energy has stepped up to help with the funding. Jordan Cove Energy recently executed a long-term funding agreement with the port to complete the project under the Army Corps of Engineers under the Section 204 program. The Section 204 is hugely important in bringing together this project, which provides opportunity to fund it with private dollars. Although Jordan Cove does not need a wider, deeper channel in Lower Coos Bay, the principals understand that their efficiency will improve and Coos Bay Harbor will benefit from an improved navigation system. Thanks to innovative partnerships with the private sector, the port is going to help pull southwestern Oregon out of its recession. Thank you for this opportunity to meet with you.
Well, thank you very much. Mr. Meadows was here first on our side, and so I'll go to him for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll be very brief. I guess what I would love for the Army Corps to talk about is how do we, from a waterways perspective, best utilize the public-private partnerships when we're talking about, it's different than a toll road where you have a toll road that services Virginia. Here we're really talking about the ultimate benefit may or may not be within that particular area. So how do we best do that? And that's the only question I have. Thank you.
Thanks, sir. Certainly that's the question that we're trying to also figure out. But one of the areas that we believe that is worth continual investigation, and we're also having some dialogue with the various users of the waterway. When I say the users, who's actually, where's the commodity start? Is it the corn growers, the soybean growers, and beneficiaries of the waterway? That gets back to that notion of, are there benefits to the farmers? Are there benefits to recreational usage on the waterways? Are there non-federal hydropower benefits? So these are the areas. Where are the benefits and what are the benefits that we could talk with folks about and say, can you be a part of this partnership in regards to?
I think nobody will deny here that there are potential benefits. Yeah. Getting somebody to pay for them is the second part of that. And so, so how do we most closely tie user fees or whatever it may be to those that benefit the most?
I don't know that I have a real good answer for that. I wish I did. I know Mike, too, is talking about the user's fees, for the Inland Waterway Trust Fund. That's really the only fee that's used right now. But we don't charge a fee for recreation coming through. Maybe there's something that could be evaluated, but you really have to go through that value for money analysis to see at least what we're understanding and talking with folks who do this. A real analysis to determine what are the users directly on the waterway, and is there something that could be gleaned from a user's fee? But again, some of our thinking now is, if you can move commodities cheaper, you have a more reliable system. If you can move beans, for example, cheaper, then are the soybean growers willing to consider, some of those profits as being part of a payback system on, being able to go in and have a P3 that would be able to have a, get the reliability improved sooner. So that's one area that we're having some discussions with, some of those folks about. Again, just trying to initiate some dialogue and get a sensing for the willingness of folks to say, yeah, we see a reliable system, it would be cheaper, therefore we would be able to contribute something. But we just haven't really gotten that fleshed out completely ourselves.
All right, thank you. Mr. DeFazio.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to, as raised by the Port of Coos Bay, we've used what are existing programs that aren't exactly P3s, but a way to move forward more quickly with needed infrastructure improvements in our ports. In this case, we're talking about dredging and a turning basin and depths and that, things which right now, I mean, the Corps doesn't have the budgetary capability of dealing with. And so we used 203, and now we're looking at moving forward with the actual project under 204. Now, 204 changed in the 14 Act a bit. And there's a question here which we need to get answered, which is, since we've already done the 203 and we're proceeding on the 204, are we, we feel very strongly that we meet the grandfather provisions, the Corps, the port does. I've talked to committee staff who participated in writing the bill, and I was a conferee on the bill, and I feel that we're covered. But I'd just like to know what the Corps' interpretation is of that grandfather clause for 204 projects, because this is something that if we don't move ahead, the whole project grinds to a halt. And as we mentioned earlier, time's money in terms of these projects.
Yes, sir. We're, certainly that particular provision in WRDA, like all the provisions in WRDA, what we're doing right now is working on the development of the implementation guidance. So we really haven't, and I'm not sure exactly where we are in that particular piece of legislation, but we're working that with the administration, on how we would implement the various provisions of WRDA, and really we've just gotten underway with doing that. So I don't have an answer for you in that regard today.
I'd suggest that the way we want to look at it is we have an existing program. You haven't developed the implementation of the new program. We don't want to delay projects while we figure out how we're going to implement a new program. So therefore, anything that's colorable as a pre-existing project, it was the intention of the committee, and I think the other members here who participated in writing that bill would agree. Our intent was not to say, oh, wait a minute, now you're going to have to go through a whole new process, and in a year or two from now, after we figure out what the regulations are, we just can't afford that. The nation can't afford that. So I would hope that that's going to be the position of the Corps in this matter. Okay. So, Mr. Kronstein, do you want to just comment on, sort of the timelines and the importance of this project and how much money the feds are saving by not having to do the project?
Well, certainly. We started this project with a different sponsor, which was APM Terminals, which is a Mueller-Maersk company, and their intent was to export containers, but with the downturn in the economy, that didn't work out. So there's one of our partnerships that didn't work out, and Jordan Cove Energy did pick that up. So to follow the standard dredging procedures, we're looking at 15 years to accomplish this. That won't work in private industry. They can't spend that kind of time. We're looking for the 204 to bring that down to about 5 years, and it'll be 7 because we've already been in it, and we're looking for that to expedite the project. The amount of money that we're talking about is approximately $300 million to widen and deepen the channel, and that depends also on other users and the sizes of ships that they needed. For containers, we need quite a bit more. The Jordan Cove Energy people do not need this widening and deepening to do their project. They can bring ships in, but it will bring efficiencies to them because they'll be able to bring ships in on any tide rather than having to wait for tide. And so they realize that that's going to save them money, and they can make their model work to help support and pay for this project.
So the private entity, in the end, would be responsible for the actual project?
Yes.
And the cost is estimated to be near $300 million?
Yes.
I just wonder, Mr. Hannon, I long fought to, and complained to my colleagues about the backlog and the Corps of Engineers, your critical projects, critical infrastructure, which I don't know what the current number is, but it's many tens of billions of dollars. And in fact, once for a very brief period of time, we had an incredibly candid head of the Corps of Engineers, one of our former colleagues, And when he came before the committee to testify on the administration's submitted budget, this was, I believe, in the Bush era, he said the budget was totally inadequate. The next week, for family reasons, he was leaving his job. So we're all pretty familiar with, so just when we look at this, I mean, $300 million, when do you think the Corps would be able to allocate $300 million to the little port of Coos Bay way out there in western Oregon to undertake a project like this? How long do you think it would be before we could accumulate the capital we need as a public entity and meeting a cost-benefit analysis and all that? If ever.
Yeah, sir, I'll have to go back and we'd have to get with our folks to take a look.
But I mean, yeah. But let's say that would be, not looming in the immediate budgetary future. So, okay, thank you. I mean, I just want to really emphasize here that, this isn't exactly a P3, but it is accomplishing a public purpose that, is necessary. This city, Coos Bay, and the south coast of Oregon has been essentially in a recession or depression for about 25 years. And this is really the first ray of light we've seen in that whole time, as long as I've been representing the area, and we want to make sure it moves forward with all due dispatch. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Barletta.
Thank you. When I was mayor of my hometown in Hazleton, I noticed that the Port of Philadelphia had a problem because of the widening of the Panama Canal. The larger ships that would be coming over to the East Coast, there was a need at the Port of Philadelphia to deepen the channel. Their problem was that they had nowhere to put the dredge materials. In Hazleton, my hometown, I had an abandoned mine land which was essentially a hole that needed to be filled. Now, it wasn't just a small hole. It was going to take 12 million cubic yards of material to fill this hole. There wasn't a developer in America or in the world that would take on a project like that, but I saw a perfect marriage. There's the Port of Philadelphia had material, and there was I in Hazleton with a hole. So only for $1 a cubic yard, I was willing to take that material off their hands so that the project would continue. The beneficial use that we found in Hazleton was not only to reclaim an abandoned mine land and bring that land back to useful property. The developer was going to build a 20,000-seat open-air amphitheater, which would have been the largest in northeastern Pennsylvania, which would have created a lot of economic opportunities. And now he's actually looking at an inland port because of the widening project. So, what was once a problem for a community, and what I think is for America, is how do we reclaim abandoned mine lands that we just live with right now that contaminates our streams and our rivers through the acid mine drainage. So as we continue to prepare for the expansion of the Panama Canal, we need to invest in the maintenance of our water infrastructure. And this is going to include the widening and deepening of our ports. Mr. Hannan, what are some of the beneficial uses of this material?
Well, certainly, sir, one of the things that we are evaluating are across the nation the opportunities to develop the public-private partnerships. Some folks call it P3, others even P4, on the ability to use the material that's dredged as opposed to taking up, in some cases, and using up the confined disposal facility space that we have designated. We think that there's really opportunities if we can get people, again, it's about communicating, within the particular region or port area, what types of beneficial uses could there be. We've even had some folks talk to us about making bricks out of some of the dredged material and opportunities to do that where someone can do that and sell it. But certainly if we can get the beneficial use, if we can find upland areas to dispose of materials, and again, work out the agreements to where the cost of dredging that material is offset, and by some way. Normally we would have a federal standard in which we would dispose of the material. So the cost to do that is, if it was more to do the beneficial use, if there are those who are willing to pay that difference so that, you know, it's a zero-sum game, then that would be one of the areas that we'd be looking at doing. But certainly you know, any areas that we could find to use it beneficially for, again, you know, whoever is going to get that benefit, it's who's the ultimate end user and benefit, and would they be willing to contribute to some of the costs to be able to place that material in another location. But you know, we really think those are opportunities to investigate further.
I think this is a perfect model. There's so many abandoned mine lands around the country which just remain abandoned, where we can actually bring that back to beneficial use by taking that and using the private sector to do it. Mr. Kronsteiner, how are you disposing of the dredge material at the port?
There's quite a bit on this project, and so first of all, the project that we're doing has extensive removal, and then the rehabilitation project has another. So there are several places. There are some that is going to be used for beach rehabilitation where it has gone away. The airport needs a runway extension, and a power plant needs a foundation lifted a significant amount. And frankly, where you're going to have about 1 million yards, we still have to figure out. But, you know, then short of that, it's not beneficial use, but dumping it at sea would be the result.
Now, there are people who will pay for that material, I guarantee you. Don't dump it in the sea. So there's never been a problem in finding a use for the material.
Well, there hasn't been, and we have a lot of property. There is a lot of dredge spoil on this North Spit already, and it's actually created habitat for the snowy plover. They've moved in because they like that.
Right. And finally, this question is for all of you, if you could touch on it briefly. What are the roadblocks to the government working creatively with the private sector to find solutions to the unique problems like we did in Hazleton by simply putting dirt in a hole?
Well, the roadblocks that we identify are the concerns that we have with P3s or just with dredge material. With P3s, it's, you know, the land ordinance of 1787 said the waterways shall be forever free. And lots of businesses have located along the waterways based on the assumption that the transit of their materials, their goods, would be through free lockage. And if the government is now going to impose tolls on those facilities, you're going to create discrimination between those that are located on waterways that don't have locks and dams and those that are on the lock system. And their costs are going up while their competitors are not. And so you're going to have economic dislocation concerns there. The other impediment we see is that the current policy is to impose a user fee on only one beneficiary of the inland waterway system, the commercial user. There are 300 taxpayers of the current levy. Most of those are family-owned businesses. There's some big players in the space. I won't dispute that, AEP or Cargill, but most of the barge industry is still a family-owned business. And they cannot afford to pay the cost of the whole system when you have free riders like hydroelectric power does not pay into the Inland Waterway Trust Fund, but we place those facilities in inland waterway dams. Water supply is a free good. No one pays anything for the benefit of water supply. Recreation is over 50% of the use of locks. They pay nothing into the Inland Waterway Trust Fund. Flood damage prevention, land value enhancement, other benefits. So there are lots of benefits that obtain from the inland waterway system that we don't charge for. And we're not recommending that you charge for it, but when you try to finance a P3 project and put the cost solely on one user of the system, that's not going to be economically feasible. We cannot afford a $15,000 per lockage fee when we transit 52 locks or 27 locks on one segment. So with respect to dredge material, we have critical needs. We have a lot of small inland ports that are not being dredged because the core policy is if you have less than 1 million tons of cargo moving across your port, you don't get dredged because they don't have enough resources to do that. That's created tremendous problems in places like Hickman Harbor, Kentucky, Memphis, that are not getting adequate dredging. We'd like to create more opportunity to use dredge material, but we're resource constrained right now.
One of our big issues with getting the beneficial use from the dredge materials is mitigating for wetlands, and the exchange is so large that we have to create so much that it's near impossible to do in the same estuary, and we keep bumping up against that at the state and federal level. And there would be places easily to dispose of this if we could overcome some of those issues.
Mr. Bartlett, I think your example of looking for a new use of dredge material is a good way to look at P3s. I'd first of all say a P3, in the way I view it, is not useful in all circumstances. You may have a screwdriver, you may have a hammer, and they get used for the right tool. And so one of the habits that we might see where the P3 is less useful is where it is administered as a government contract would be, with a standard set of specs. This is what I want to get done. This is the price I want to pay. And from the private sector standpoint, you don't get a chance to stimulate the innovation of explore different solutions. And it tends to be a fixed price where over a period of time, and the challenge has been raised where with long returns that private sector is not interested. But the other way to look at that is if there's truly an innovative approach, a new use for the dredge spoils, for example, then you look for a longer payback period. You look at the life cycle cost for that. You look at an upside as well as a downside in order to moderate the risk. And so I think that one of the enemies of and the dilemmas in using P3s is getting too locked into thinking that is a solution that we all of a sudden apply like a magic Band-Aid to the financing problem, and it's not. It's a solution, it's a tool that exists in many circumstances potentially, but it has, the private sector's got to be given an opportunity to kind of work with it and figure out its unique solution that it can bring something of value and achieve an upside as well as risk the downside of investing otherwise capital.
Yeah. And yes, and agree exactly with what Mr. Crowley is saying here. I think what we're finding in our evaluation is that, number one, there's not a one-size-fits-all P3, and it may not be applicable everywhere. You know, we're trying to determine if there are places that could be replicable within the federal infrastructure arena in our portfolio to really make this work. You know, a couple of things I mentioned in my opening comments that we still feel are challenges or impediments from the federal perspective is back to how do you account for that federal share, you know, where there's going to be a federal budgetary share. How do you account for that in the budget process, depending upon what that risk is? Is it the risk to the government or the risk to the private, at least as we're seeing now, a risk to the private investor? Is it accounted for up front? Is it accounted for over the period of the contract period? And then how do you do that federal payback over the period of time? Now, with the dredging aspects, however, you know, there may be opportunities to have a type of P3 where, you know, the private investors come together to make available space for beneficial use or other uses that, again, you know, with the core, you know, our role would be just the ability to place material in there. And so the actual contract itself or arrangement would be with the local area, the region, the private investors that's making the space available. And then it just kind of gets back to the some of the regulatory type actions that might be facing us, and how do we mitigate that, has been mentioned. Or it may be that the cost of placing the material for us, the federal government, exceeds what it would have been under the normal conditions, and so if someone was willing to pay that as well. So, but I think there's opportunities there. We think there's opportunities that need to be further explored.
We need to go now to Ms. Miller.
Thanks very much. I'm from the state of Michigan. My question is generally to the Corps. The Great Lakes state, where we have actually 123 harbors, and obviously the shipping industry in the Great Lakes is a critical component of our, not just Michigan, but the Great Lakes Basin, et cetera. Last year, as you're all aware, we had historic low water levels. This year, I cannot believe how high the water levels are. The weather gods were very, very kind during the winter, actually. That was it's a silver lining. It's amazing, as you know, what a huge change there's been, about at least 2 feet in the depth. But anyway, last year when we had the very high or the very low water levels, we decided that we couldn't wait around for dredging because it is so important, obviously, even to our small recreational ports, et cetera. And it's my contention that the Congress over the years has because we were in the earmarking business for a number of decades, we sort of trained the Corps of Engineers to think that unless you got an earmark, a specific earmark from a member of Congress for a harbor dredging or something, you weren't going to get any harbor dredging. And so that's the way business was done. Well, now we're all like a bunch of reformed alcoholics or reformed earmarkers, I guess. But anyway, every one of us, certainly in my state and in the Great Lakes, in the Great Lakes Basin, all of us are struggling with this. And the Corps, of course, particularly for the smaller harbors, is just say, look, we don't have any cash. We're not helping you. So we're trying to figure out what to do. Last year, the state of Michigan came forward. I mean, I talked to our governor until we were blue in the face, and he, God love him, came forward in the state legislature, came forward with about $30 million for dredging. I'm not sure if any other state has done anything like that. That would be one of my questions. We have our Waterways Commission that put on hold all of their harbor redevelopment, different kinds of things that they were doing all over the state to give us money for dredging. And still it wasn't enough, obviously. So of that, I think we did 47 harbors. The only criteria we really used was if they were a harbor of refuge. Now, subsequently, I have talked to the Corps, General Burcham, who was the Great Lakes Division. I don't know if she's moved on or whatever. She
has moved on. Yes.
Okay. I don't know who the new person is. You guys change so quickly there. Whoever is there, or to you, or whoever I'm trying to figure out who to address this question to, somehow I think it would be incredibly advantageous, and Michigan is not particularly unique in this, but certainly, of course, all of us come from our own areas there, but somehow there has to be a new model developed, because we're not going to be earmarking anymore, probably. Not in the near future anyway. And we still need to have these dredging projects done. So I think it would be helpful if the Corps could be the lead. And if you're not going to be the lead, at least give us some advice on how we could construct a P3 model for dredging projects as we need them. In other words, I'm just throwing this out, but I mean there should be if let's say a third of the money came from the Corps, if a community came forward with their local dollars and businesses that would want to contribute, et cetera, because it's always the local businesses that talk about if they don't have the transient mooring facilities, et cetera, they're in a tank economically all summer, which is true. So they are obviously a user, a benefit. Right. And the state could pay a third or something if we could determine through our own monies there how to put that together. Have you ever done anything like that? I asked her could she. And I never heard anything back. But somehow we have to develop a model. And would the Corps be willing to be the advocate on that, or are you just? And if you are just waiting for us to do something in the state, let's say we came forward to you and said this is our model. Would you have this money? And could you do that legislatively? Would we have to do this in a P3? And maybe that's part of what we're going to do here if we do some boilerplate language. Do you have the legislative authority to act on that? Do you need congressional action to agree to enter into such a contract? I mean, we really want to get some work done.
Yes.
And that's this whole idea of the P3. I mean, there's all kinds of things we're going to look at P3s. But those of us that are in the water business, we have got to get our dredging done. And we're trying to figure out the best way to do it. And everybody has to come to the table now because the federal government's just going to the spigot is not fully on there.
Right. So, thank you, ma'am. We actually do have an existing authority right now that allows us to accept contributed funds from, it could be the local, state, local municipalities or states, either. And in fact, the Michigan example that you used was where we did use that authority for accepting contributed funds. Now, it has to be an existing authorized project. In this case, it's an authorized harbor, and we've done this over the last 2 years in Oregon, working with the state of Oregon, working with the state of Michigan, working with the state of North Carolina. I know that Texas is also talking with our division office there in Dallas as well. So we have that authority. What we are really working with it to do right now is find the way that we streamline the process, to be able to, so we can say if someone wants to bring dollars to the table, contributed funds, and those are contributed, I mean, there's not any payback, on that, except for, of course, the benefits received to the local community or the harbor or the state. How can we get that done fast enough, so that up front if we're kind of targeting 120 days right now. So if you know that in 120 days that you would need some work done, you can get into that window but there's a process that we go through, through the administration, through notification here to Congress. But, what we're trying to do is see how we can work that process with some model templates, particularly, of harbors.
But you don't have any model like that right now.
We
so you
have
guys
some,
are all looking at it, right? And
No,
would you be the advocate, or would you wait until the state or the locals came to you?
Well, it starts with the state and locals coming to us, but we are educating folks to let people know that we do have this authority, and so that's part of the discussion. We do have this authority, but it starts with the state and our locals coming to us right now, and we do have some model templates that we can say if you have a dredging need or you want to contribute these funds, and you can kind of fill in the blanks for these templates. We believe that we can move that through the system quick enough and quicker than something that's rather unique, type thing. But we do have those now, those authorities, and so we're just trying to see how we can improve that process to meet those needs.
So you think it would be helpful for us as we do this P3 for us to design a model? And if you think that's true, to help you, give us some ideas.
Okay, we will do that. We'll take a look at that. I think and see if we believe there's another need to be able to do that. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Perry.
Thanks, Chairman. To Mr. Toohey, can you discuss how the private sector is ready to partner, or if they're ready to partner with the federal government, move forward on its own, if necessary, to improve water-related infrastructure?
I'm sorry, I missed a part of that question, the 4x4.
Can you discuss how the private sector is ready, or if you're ready, to partner with the federal government or move forward on its own, on your own, to improve water-related infrastructure?
Right. As I said earlier, we have used a model since 1824 of the federal primacy, where they provide the appropriations, build the project, and we use it. In the late 70s and then again in 86, we began to make a contribution to pay half the cost of construction of the projects. and an inland waterway user board was created to give us a voice to talk to the Corps about it. And WRDA 2014 made significant progress in implementing an opportunity to build the 26 authorized projects that we have on the books that are not moving forward because we're building one, Olmsted. And now the appropriators have followed behind and used increased the funding to get towards this backlog so we can reach some of the highest priority projects like Lower Mon in Pennsylvania, Chickamauga in Pennsylvania, in Tennessee, and so on. But we have $8 billion backlog, and we're not going to build the rest of that backlog, for years, maybe decades, even with the improvements made in WRDA, because a lot of it assumes the appropriators will make the money available, which is always a year-to-year challenge and leads to increase in the project. So that's why we're interested in the idea of P3s, where we could use private sector resources to build these projects. But the challenge is, how do we make it affordable? Will we allow existing capacity to remain free while we toll new capacity like we do in the highway program so the consumer has a choice? And what about the free riders, the other beneficiaries of the system that pay nothing into the Inland Waterway Trust Fund? How do we recognize their contribution to the cost of the project? And so these are all questions we have to work through. We have a lot of interest, especially on the Illinois and Upper Miss, in using the P3 process to reach out and get private sector involvement. And we have contractors like CH2M Hill that are interested in moving forward to build some of these projects. And the key thing to me is, how do we make it affordable? Because our analysis, we did a study through Mercator, said it would cost about 60 cents a ton to create a 1,200-foot lock, 2 1,200-foot locks. Well, to put that in context, that's $15,750 per lockage. And so how do we keep our farmers, our energy providers competitive in the world market if we're going to impose that kind of a cost only on one segment, the commercial segment of the beneficiary pool? And so we got a lot of work yet to do on this, but we're willing to step up and work with the private sector to do this. I was involved in trying to do a P3 on I-81 in Virginia, a tremendous truck traffic road. It was a $2 billion project to separate truck traffic from private vehicles. And there was tremendous public acceptance of this idea. But the idea of imposing tolls on commercial carriers was a complete non-starter with the trucking industry, and we never were able to reach an agreement with it. And what I also learned from that was it was very hard to get the state DOT to change. We have always done it this way since the 1956 Federal Aid Highway Act. But over time, through demonstration projects, we broke that. And it's easier in the Federal Aid Highway Program because that's a federally assisted program run by the states. Here we're talking about changing the way the Corps of Engineers has done business since 1824 on navigation. It's a program that will be run by a federal agency with appropriated funds from the federal government. And so this is whole new territory for us.
So you're ready to go, but there's no, Ms. Miller, I think, kind of already talked about it. There's no model. Each one's a little different. There's no model. And, curiously, on your I-81 project, so if you moved all the truck traffic off and they bore the burden of the cost of doing that, I'm sure there was enormous support from other than truck traffic, right? But were the other than truck traffic, were they bearing any of the cost at all?
Not currently.
Under your model, under the model you were looking at the time on I-81 in Virginia?
We were going to toll the new capacities, which would only be available for trucks.
For trucks. But is it reasonable to assume or presume at that point, so you're opening up all the other lanes on 81 to other than truck traffic, which allows you to move faster and is a better travel experience, so isn't that enhancing, and you know, nobody wants to talk about it, but I mean, that's, you know, that's part of the deal too, right? And it's the same thing on the waterways with lockage or whatever. You know, if you're going to charge only one side, but it opens it up to everybody else that isn't currently paying, they have a better experience, and I understand that. I don't know how we get to the answer, but maybe some input from you folks on some recommendations would help us.
Yeah, well, the one thing, the users of I-81 were paying through the motor fuel tax.
Well, sure, but they're not paying an additional toll
they weren't getting,
right.
They weren't going to be charged for the additional. We had actually explored the idea of putting a toll on 81 completely to help pay for it, which would reduce the cost to the trucking industry and capture some of that benefit you're talking about. But the public acceptance of tolling, time and time again, has been proven to us that they only accept tolling on new capacity. And if you try to toll existing capacity, you will have a tremendous revolt.
Thank you. One other question for Mr. Hannon here regarding WIFIA and the effective use specifically for the set-aside for rural communities. Can you discuss what the plan is for the Corps regarding the rural communities to help them use that program?
Again, you know, as I mentioned previously, that's one of the areas in which we're beginning to develop, you know, what that guidance would look like. But we have already begun a dialogue with EPA, since it's, you know, an EPA Corps of Engineers, to start having some discussions with them to determine, you know, what would be the development of that guidance on how to use that. But that's about as far as we have gotten with it right now.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Thanks, gentlemen. I think these conversations always are enjoyable to me because it raises more problems and questions than it answers. But that's normal. I don't think you work through anything unless you do that. I want to make a few points, though. I mean, there are some comments I made. When it comes to dredging, we already make a local match for those of us on the ocean. It's a significant local match, a lot more than $30 million. And we do it all the time. By the way, I don't know if the Corps did it, but we went around you or we worked with you to get some of these contributions in Boston as well, in the small section of the Chelsea Creek. And it worked out great. It worked out great. Don't get me wrong. I don't remember I don't remember the exact method, but you're very helpful. And we had some private, and by the way, it wasn't just government. It was also private companies that came to the fore and threw some money down because it was helping them. So it worked out pretty well for us. And when it comes to tolling highways, I mean, first of all, when you talk about waterways, I'm more familiar with the ocean stuff than I am with the inland waterways, but there's really not much option. I mean, you either use the Mississippi River or you don't. I mean, unless there's another river or canal that I don't know about. So you can't divert traffic. You toll them, you toll everybody. And when you do toll, even on a highway, so far, that's part of my problem, is a lot of the assumptions have been made. They don't want to take into account the cost of the tolls. I mean, I agree with you, Mr. Perry, that we should take into account the benefits that are enjoyed by people who don't pay, whatever the thing might be. But we also need to take in the costs that are associated with diverted traffic. You toll 81, somebody's not going to use it. And there are alternative roads to every single interstate highway. They usually run through a residential or a commercial area, and they cost money to maintain. They take time, do all of other things. So those things have to be taken into account as well. When everything's said and done, it's really just money. And we're at the same situation here. There just isn't enough money. And to be perfectly honest, in my opinion, Congress is not willing to do what we need to do to address these issues. We're not willing to raise the gas tax or find another alternative revenue source. We're not willing to do anything with the harbor maintenance tax is okay. Even that's not perfectly fair because some harbors pay it, some don't, therefore creating commercial disadvantages to some that I think are inappropriate. But all that being said, I want to be real clear. I enter this whole thing, and I don't want anybody walking away thinking that everybody here is for or against P3s. I don't really care in the sense that what I want is I want to use these potentials for when they are appropriate. Mr. Crowley, you said it. Some work, some don't. I actually think that waterways, and again, Mr. Crowley, because of what you said, historically, at least on the harbors, again, I don't know the inland maintenance, the inland stuff so well, it's always been a public-private relationship, always. And I shouldn't say always in my knowledge anyway. And so it is a more unique situation. Every harbor is significantly different than any other harbor. I mean, you get an airport's an airport. You know, runways have to be a certain length. They have to be flat. They have to have a certain approach. Every single harbor is significantly different. And you know, that being the case, I actually think that at least the harbor stuff, and again, it sounds like the inland stuff, is probably a perfect place to try to figure out how to do these P3s. At the same time, I don't know where you go to get the money on them. I don't know where the private guys get it. And when it comes to the harbors, the private guys get it by buying the port. And you know, you know the issues we've had with ports that have been bought, and some of the security concerns we have, some of the other concerns we have. And all that being said, if we're not going to sell ports to private companies, which I have some concerns with, who else is going to pay? Who's going to, I mean, I eat corn. I don't live in Iowa, but I eat corn. And I needed to get there. And if, you know, the guys doing it are going to start charging me a lot more, I'll stop. Or I may not stop, but I'll slow down. And I really think that we got to get back to some degree of trying to figure out what is in the national interest when it comes to transportation. Is it in the national interest to do $80 billion, or whatever the number is going to be, of backed up projects? And that's only your projects. We're not even talking about the dams that are not yours. You know, and in New England, there's hundreds of them that were built by private companies, owned privately, and they're in worse repair than any of your dams because you guys do a pretty good job maintaining with what you got with a lot of Band-Aid and spit and glue. These are just walked away from. We can't even find who owns some of them because they were owned 200 years ago by, you know, Sam Adams Company or whatever. And, you know, not Sam Adams, that's a new company. I meant the original Sam Adams. You know, all that being said, I want to be clear. For me, I'm trying to find ways to see how these P3s work. I don't have any philosophical views whether they're good, bad, or indifferent, because in my analysis, my constituents are going to pay one way or the other. They're either going to pay directly through taxes, they're going to pay in higher corn prices, or whatever it's going to be, period. There's no way around it. And for me, I would like to know which ones of these projects, in your estimation, and it sounds to me like on the water stuff, it sounds like you're probably asking the question too early, if you want the truth. It sounds to me like you're a little bit different than the highway guys and some of the building guys. They're a little bit further down the road on this stuff. But which ones of these projects are appropriate for P3s? And by the way, I want to also clarify, I think for me, the word P3 has become misused. And it's not misused, it was my misuse of it. I never really thought of a design-build situation as a P3. I guess it is technically. I'm thinking more in the terms of, you know, selling assets or the terms of, you know, operating and maintenance, not so much the design-build. That's just a method of building something a little bit more efficiently. But I guess which ones of these water projects are best? And if it's too early to tell, I think that's a fair answer, to be perfectly honest. I mean, you know, we're not there yet. And is the rest of the world doing more P3s when it comes to water situations? And if so, how are they financing them? And I'm not directing the question at anybody in particular, because each one of you is more qualified than I am on this. So whoever wants to, feel free to jump in. Or if you don't want to jump in, that's an answer too.
There's a lot there. I would say that, you know, my personal view is that P3s are very appropriate. We will probably see the first P3s in the area of port development. There's another area that, which is the environmental restoration mission of the Corps of Engineers. Mr. Bartletta's point, there are organizations, TN's, the Nature Conservancy, Ducks Unlimited, that might be partners to do restoration if they could get access to the dredge material.
We did it with the Big Dig. We built an island with Big Dig
right.
material and some core material as well.
You know, the environmental restoration mission now is the largest mission of the Corps. Navigation used to be. But in terms of dollars appropriated and the new authorizations in WERDA, that is becoming the Corps' biggest program. And so that may be...
I also want anybody to forget that a lot of the dredging material is not suitable to be used other places. Most of our harbors for 300 years were used as de facto dumping grounds. So you got to be a little...
But there are places it's appropriate, and I think you might see P3s there. We still have to figure out how to make it viable financially for the inland system.
Have any of you worked with any of the harbors that were sold? I mean, there were a couple of smaller ones that were, and they've actually been resold, I guess, as a couple of places.
I'd actually suggest that most of them have not been sold. They've been engaged in private-public partnerships.
No, I know, but there was a discussion not too long ago to sell some of them to Dubai.
I understand, but most of the models that exist today within harbors are publicly owned waterfront properties where the public community, whether it's the Port Authority or some other entity at the local or at the state level, decides they don't have enough money to invest in something. And at the very beginnings, it may be the mechanical container moving equipment, which is still millions of dollars to procure the right equipment. At the high end, there have been private sector companies that have come in and laid conduit, have built an interchange, have put the yard down, the buildings, and so on and so forth. All of this, of course, comes out the other end and what the payback needs to be. And so when you're on the low end and you're just building a new crane operation, that might be a 10-year payback. If you're building the whole operation with an interchange and the dredging offshore in the immediate approach channel, that's done in some cases, but that's going to take a longer payback. In terms of, you then get into the discussion of models, and I would argue that a model doesn't work very well because what it is really a negotiation that has to occur between the unique circumstances that the private sector is recommending as the solution and what works for the governmental representative. And what I've seen is those members of the governmental representatives that are most isolated from, let's say, public policy, as opposed to trying to make good business decisions that work for a duration, are the most successful in the long run. Like everything, you need to plan for some change of circumstances. But these are things that work around the globe. And I can point to examples where a private sector entity comes in to operate, not to take over the property, because it never exists in most countries around the globe to have private ownership by a foreign national. It just doesn't happen. But to offer to do the business of commerce for that country, one port per country many times, and in order to accomplish that, does the approach dredging, and it accomplishes a lot of work in that regard, and may also, for example, build a school, a training center as part of the business deal. But of course, the product out of that has to be a commensurate return on the investment. And again, the longer and the more involved it is, you're not looking at a fixed price. You're looking at the opportunity for an upside from a business standpoint. So I think there's a lot of different options. And in all cases, for example, in the foreign entities that I see, that is the global examples, nations do that because then they can put money. This is a place where they can find a business solution, and they can put their own limited resources to another purpose. So my statement would be, you find the places where you can use a private partnership in the way I characterize it, and you open up and free the funds that are available through this committee and through the Congress to go to the core in a traditional government contract or combined with a user fee where that's more appropriate. Thank you.
Yes, sir. And I think we are in the very early stages of trying to evaluate, particularly like on our inland systems, the applicability of these types of tools. But it's worthy to continue to, do that, peeling those layers back and seeing, what may or may not work. Certainly, the folks that we're talking to right now that's helping us kind of look at this have been more involved with international type of public-private partnership types of financing. We're beginning to see, though, that maybe something that would work is the previously authorized projects that are already authorized right now, like flood risk management, flood control projects, that local communities, and there's a local sponsor for, and their share's kind of the largest share. There's still a government share because it's an authorized project and there's a federal interest. But this notion of design, build, operate, and maintain is what the private investor brings to the table. They bring to the table the full funding up front. The project gets built sooner, benefits sooner. the requirement to pay back that investment starts when the project goes into operation, but the private investor is also doing that operating and maintain piece over that period of that time. But again, the challenge gets back to how do we guarantee the federal investment payback, and how do we account for those dollars up front? So those are some of the things that we're still trying to figure out through continued discussions with the administration, obviously having the opportunities like this to at least see where we see some of the challenges, that are out there right now. But I do think it's still kind of in the early stages of just trying to sort it out here in the U.S.
Thank you.
Ms. Norton? You. Well, let me, I've got some questions and comments. And first of all, Mr. Toohey, it's not often that we hear the 1787 law on the waterways mentioned in this room, but I certainly admire and respect your knowledge on these issues. And what year did you first start working with this committee?
1787?
1970. I've been gone from the committee staff longer than most members have been eligible
Right.
to seek a certificate of election.
Well, I will. This is my 26th year on this committee, and I've certainly enjoyed it. But you and I have been in on a lot of hearings of different types, and have met together several times. And I really appreciate the industry you represent. I mean, people just don't think about it or realize the benefits. I mean, everything practically is cheaper because of the work that your industry does, getting goods to people quicker and more efficiently and more economically. But you said you don't think it's fair to put all the costs on one segment, and everybody would agree with that. But the Waterways Council has recommended a fuel tax increase. Now, would you go into that a little bit?
Yes.
Explain that.
Our thinking was that when we sat down with our partners in the Corps and developed recommendations to Congress to consider for reforming the delivery of inland navigation projects, we felt that it was fair that if we got these reforms, we should pay a part of that. And so we recommended to the Congress a 6 to 9 cent increase in our user fee. We currently pay 20 cents a gallon on diesel fuel consumed operating on the inland waterway system. And that would bring in as much as $40 million a year more, which is currently matched dollar for dollar by the federal government. So it would be $80 million more in construction. And so that was our recommendation to the Congress, that we try to get that. And that, frankly, was the only piece of what we recommended that WRDA didn't deliver. WRDA historically has been the vehicle for imposing and raising the user fee on the inland waterway, just like it is on the highway system. And so we thought it would be perfectly logical and germane to the discussion to raise our user fee if we were getting the reforms that we sought. Unfortunately, that got trapped in a discussion about comprehensive tax reform. And interestingly, our proposal on raising our user fee is in Chairman Camp's comprehensive tax reform bill. And it's because we developed a coalition to support the Wave 4 legislation that involves organized labor, the business community, National Chamber, NAM, all of the organized labor associations that build the projects, but all of the ag groups. We have 82 organizations that support raising our fee, and we're having the darndest time making that happen. We don't have any opposition to raising our user fee, but we get trapped, initially on the Senate side there was support to do it, but we had, that pesky origination clause of the Congress that says revenue measures have to originate in the House. So the leader over there said, no, we're not going to put it on WRDA, and over here we had to wait for comprehensive tax reform. And so while we got the reforms we wanted, we're not paying our fair share, in our view, and we're trying to get on the highway patch our 9 cent increase, and any help the committee might offer to the Ways.
I'll do everything I can to help you.
But Senator Casey is going to try to amend the Senate patch to put our user fee on it. That won't happen on the House side is our information, but hopefully in conference there'll be something to talk about. But you've been one of our champions on that, and we're deeply appreciative.
Let me ask you this. You at the beginning of your testimony, you sort of sounded like that many years ago you were a little bit skeptical or more skeptical about public-private partnerships, and you expressed concern by some of your members years ago that some of the smaller firms might get left out and these partnerships would just be with the big giants and so forth. But then as you went through your testimony, you sound a little more open or positive about these things. Was there any one or two particular things that caused you to move a little bit, or did you see some specific projects that worked well? What do you have to say about that?
Yeah, in my prior life, I worked for a company that owned the nation's largest road construction company, APAC, Tennessee, right. Alcoa. They were located in your state. They started in Massachusetts, by the way. But there was just tremendous concern that only the Peter Kiewitz or the Bechtels of the world would be able to get these projects, finance them, and build them. And so while there'd be all this new work, we weren't going to get any of it because we're mostly small business entities that compete for local work. Mm-hmm. And but what we found was right here in Richmond, when the state led a P3, we bid on it and we got the work. We got the dirt contract. We didn't get a lot of, but we worked with smaller companies like English Construction, which is a Virginia-based company, and so all of a sudden there was this aha moment that there's a lot of work coming from P3s for our business and for others, and it creates an opportunity for the states to get priorities projects off their books that they would never reach through the current, federal aid highway program with the apportionment that they get every year, and so. Now you see this wide acceptance where they just finished a project on the Beltway here around Washington with private funds, tolled, and the consumer has a choice to use it or not use it. We'd never have been able to expand the capacity on the Beltway under the current federal apportionments that are flowing to Virginia. And so it's that kind of learning in the highway program that I think is relevant to the Inland Waterway program. While we currently see barriers, just like they did when they started the P3 program in the highways, we have a tremendous backlog that we're not going to reach for years. I mean, Chickamauga may fall down before we fund that project. Mm-hmm. Other projects may fall down, and there's real consequences. When we had the drought of the winter of 2011-2012, there was concern that the inland waterways between St. Louis and Cape Girardeau were going to shut down. Now, the Corps, thank God for the Corps, was able to keep it open. But as a result of that, international buyers of corn went away, and they haven't come back because they thought we had an unreliable transportation system. So U.S. producers in the ag sector lost an opportunity, and it never came back. And so we have got to figure out a way to invest. Most of our locks and dams are eligible for Social Security. And we have a trust fund for them, but it doesn't fund enough of it. It only throws off about $165 million. If we're successful in getting the Wave 4 recommendation of 6 to 9 cents, we'll raise that number to about $220 million a year. But that takes a long time to get to an $8 billion backlog. So that's why we're open to P3s. All right. Why we still see, it's not affordable under our current analysis. We'd love to, there's lots of people that are real smart out there in the financial community. Like I-81, we had the financing all lined up, but it required a toll, and we couldn't get approval from the state to do the toll. And so a $2 billion project went away.
Well, I tell you, of course, another way that anybody who thinks about it should appreciate your industry is you take an astounding number of, we all want the trucking industry to do well, but you take an astounding number of trucks off the highways, and that helps in a lot of different ways. But what are the latest figures on that? Do you know how many tractor trailers you take off the highways each year?
Yeah, it's 50,000 trucks per barge, so it's a tremendous efficiency.
Yeah.
216 rail cars plus 6 locomotives.
Yeah.
We're the most fuel efficient. We move 1 ton of freight 1 mile, 616 miles on 1 gallon of fuel.
Right.
But also the industry, what we're most proud of is you can come to work in our industry with only a high school education, and you can, within 5 years, be making a 6-figure income. You'll start at a 5-figure income. You can become a pilot and then a captain with a high school education.
That's
You've
great.
been out on a towboat. You
Yes,
saw
I
how
have.
skilled they are.
Yep.
But we're working with the House in D.C., Southeast Washington, to try to provide jobs for their high school graduating students in our inland waterway industry. It's a wonderful relationship we have with them. I'd be happy to talk to you about that because it's really, an opportunity. So many of those young people are stuck in a 4-block area in Southeast, and we're looking to try to create an economic opportunity for them with their high school diploma.
Let me move very quickly to some of these other panelists. And Mr. Hannon, you mentioned 2 or 3 times about one of the main advantages of the P3s would be that we can get projects done much more quickly. And I can tell you, over the years, I chaired the Aviation Subcommittee, I chaired the Water Resources and Environment Subcommittee, I chaired the Highways and Transit Subcommittee, and all those subcommittees, they always said that we were taking, on average, about 3 times as long as any other developed nation to get these major projects done, infrastructure projects. And the problem is you don't get to the benefits more quickly, but also prices, the cost goes way up. So if you can find a way to get things done more quickly, not only do you see the benefits much more quickly, but you get more bang for your buck. You can do 2 projects or 3 projects instead of just 1. That's why we've tried so hard in all these bills to have environmental streamlining. It wasn't nobody wanted to do bad things to the environment. We just wanted to be able to do, we wanted to be able to help more poor and lower income and working people by getting these projects done more quickly and economically. And that's who really benefits from it. But the staff tells me that the Army Corps has held over the years several meetings about to gauge interest in P3s and so forth. Do you know about that? And have you seen a lot of interest? And what things seem to be the most attractive to businesses? And are you seeing is it mainly just extremely big businesses, or is it a wide variety? What can you tell us about it? What have you learned from all those meetings that I understand you've held?
Yeah, sure. We've had over the past couple of years, we've conducted some sessions with, brought in like the federal highways. We brought in consultants who have done this type of work. Not so much the private investors, but more the folks who's helped to be kind of put packages together for public-private partnerships. That really, through those processes, through those discussions, through those dialogues, is where we're starting to develop, some of the criteria, some of the kind of the different framework that we're thinking that that we could put together and begin to inform us of what works in regards, like I mentioned a minute ago, like some of the flood risk management type projects. What we still haven't really gotten, though, is, the investors. Who are some of these big investors that can bring dollars to the table and say, here's where I would, take risk, or here's where I wouldn't take risk. Here's how I would, evaluate whether, back to the risk, I would enter into an agreement depending on how I could get paid back from the federal government share, not maybe so much the local sponsor share in some of these areas as they work with them to develop their share of the payback. So that's kind of our next steps, is to start reaching out to some of those folks who actually bring the dollars to the table to say, help us understand from your perspective, if you had this type of project out here, you know, what would be your interest in you know, putting together a $1-2 billion package. You know, we've learned also that for the most time, you know, the folks are interested in something over $500 million, not something that's really, you know, much smaller than that. But so again, we're in that early formative stages of this and the discussions we've had, and we have some reports that we can share of some of the, certainly of the discussions we've had and meetings that we've had over the last couple of years to try to kind of develop a better understanding. Because for us, this is just totally new and different from something that we have done in the past.
I've got a couple more questions, but I want to go to Mrs. Norton and let her have a chance.
You know, in these very interesting hearings we've been having on P3s, we often see the private sector not stepping up. For example, in roads, we see that some states have moved ahead of the paralysis in the country, paralysis we're going through as I speak, as we try just to get what looks like a patch out of here to keep the transportation, the trust fund alive. But I have a question about whether there's a difference here when it comes to waterways. I note that in this area, and I want to thank Mr. Toohey for the work he's doing with our own kids here in the Southeast, because if there's a need, and it looks like there must be a shortage, please come here. We'll help fill it of workers in that sector. But I note a lot of private sector work going on in the waterways here, stimulated, it would seem, by the Panama Canal. Now, all up and down the East Coast, South Carolina, Virginia. Virginia has its own money trying to make its ports ready for what the Panama Canal is going to do. I don't know, are P3s in that? Or has the fact that the Panama Canal and its extension stimulated all of this activity that we see on the East Coast without P3s? In other words, it's happening because the states and the private sector, and I know there's a huge amount of private sector money in here, and the railroads competing with the trucks to see who gets the business, and the ports want to get the business for their port rather than the port down the way. How's that being done? Where's all that money coming from?
Mr. Norton, I think that in part much of the money within the port is coming from the private sector today, not in all locations and not equally.
That's what I think. I think that they're stimulated by the Panama Canal, and they don't need P3s or anybody else. They need private competition, and I wonder if that kind of stimulus is possible elsewhere, so that the states and, heaven forbid, the federal government wouldn't be the funder of last resort, or, as it turns out, no resort here.
I think one of the challenges has been, and as we've talked much of this morning about in dredging and the channel depth, and where does that funding come from? And to find a private sector business proposition has probably challenged everybody on this table. Let me just revert to a little bit of process with a recommendation from what I've seen works process-wise, that what I would do if I was in such a position as I'd look for someone with an office staff that is experienced from the private sector in commercial strategy, that knows how to look for new and innovative approaches where there might be business opportunities. So you have on both sides of the table someone looking for new and interesting opportunities, and then the business side looking for that. To look for someone in a process that has time, this is the second piece of the process, has time to be exposed to the public, because so much of this, when it's new, business may be tepid in moving into something new without a proven track record that the public at large and public policy will accept their solutions. And so you allow things to germinate a little bit and try to have a 60, 90-day window to close on an agreement. And then the final part of the process, as I mentioned earlier, is the wherewithal within that office, within that expertise to say, at the end of the day, after all the negotiations have gone on, this just does not work. Because the worst thing that can happen is have the bad example that turns off the private sector and say, look what happened, we don't want to do this again. And the same thing on the public sector, we don't want to do this again. And so you have to have someone with the right position to say, enough's enough, this is the wrong way to go down, we're going to wait for a better option.
Congresswoman, the inland waterway especially, but navigation in general, has been a uniquely federal responsibility recognized by our founding fathers. I mean, history is replete of quotes by George Washington about the divine providence has given us these great waterways, and his hope that we would have the wisdom to improve them. And because they flow through many states, it's a uniquely federal role and responsibility to manage these. And in Panama, the government is funding, is acting as the general contractor, if you will, for the development of that project. It arranged for the financing, and the tolls will pay the government contracted. So you had the federal government acting as the agent of change down there. And that's what we have historically
But that's not
done.
the agent of change when Virginia put its money in. But that's not the agent of change when the Virginia puts its money into expanding its ports, or South Carolina puts its money in for all the federal regulation or responsibility. Something, it looks like, what happened in Panama is making this stuff go, and nobody's talking about P3s or anything else. I don't suggest that we have that kind of stimulus throughout the waterways, but I am suggesting that it is an example that shows that when the federal government does not step up, and there's lots of business out there, the states themselves will come up with money, and the private sector knows how to compete and how to get into the business of helping to deepen those ports so that their port will be the chosen port.
Let me apologize to Ms. Norton. The time got away from me a little bit. I had some more things. So I got too interested in what was going on. I have to sit in for the speaker starting at noon, and so I've got to be over there on time. And I did want to say that I certainly appreciate all of y'all being here. You've been very, very helpful and informative. And Mr. Kronsteiner, I especially appreciate you coming all the way from Oregon, and it's been very interesting to hear, and I'm glad to hear the success you've had with your work out there. So with that, we're going to close this. And Ms. Norton, I apologize if you have anything else you want to submit, we're certainly open to that. But thank you very much. That will conclude this roundtable. Thank you.
That was very, better than I thought it would be.